Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel. I'm here with Kate Batchelder-Odell and Bill McGurn. Bill was talking earlier in the show about this dispute that's now ongoing. The whistleblowers say that Weiss's hands were tied and that Biden appointees, other U.S. attorneys, refused to bring up these cases. Before we delve into that a little further, let's listen to Attorney General Merrick Garland, who somewhat passionately pushed back on that idea on Friday.
Mr. Weiss, who was appointed by President Trump as the U.S. Attorney in Delaware and assigned this matter during the previous administration, would be permitted to continue his investigation and to make a decision to prosecute any way in which he wanted to and in any district in which he wanted to. Mr. Weiss has since sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee confirming that he had that authority. I don't know how it would be possible for anybody to block him from bringing a prosecution, given that he has this authority.
And he was never told no.
I'm saying he was given complete authority to make all decisions on his own.
So a couple of points here that I just would like to set the record straight in terms of that statement. I keep noting that the Department of Justice and the media all bang on about the fact that Weiss was appointed by Donald Trump. I would note that he's the attorney from Delaware, which means that President Trump was not able to appoint him without the sign-off of the two Democratic senators from Delaware. So it's hardly as if this guy is some right-wing Republican prosecutor, which is what people are trying to suggest. I'm not suggesting in any way that he's anything but fair. We don't know. But this sort of talking point that because he was appointed by Trump, that's just all there is. The other question I think is notable is you heard Merrick Garland there talking about the letter that Weiss sent to the House Republicans. I would just point out the timing here. By this point, the whistleblower claims were public. We didn't have their testimony, but their lawyers had written letters. Everybody understood that this was coming, that these guys were talking to Congress. And I just think it's a little fascinating that it's just about at that time that David Weiss sends a letter to the House Republicans out of nowhere saying, believe me, I was completely free to do whatever I want. But Kate, it strikes me what Bill was saying earlier. This is potentially a problem for the Department of Justice because these guys testified in front of the House under penalty of perjury, and there seems to be documents suggesting that what they said is true. Both sides can't be right in this scenario. I think the Department of Justice is being a little cagey about how they phrase things, but how does it strike you?
Well, I think cagey is exactly right. If you listen at the end of the clip we just played, someone shouts, well, was he ever told no? And Garland says, he had full authority, right? Doesn't really answer the question about whether he was ever told no. So I think we are going to see a lot of subpoenas in this case, and it will be instructive to see what Garland has to say further about these allegations. I think it is, in addition to the perjury points, really the politics here have evolved in a way that I think is important, which is that Biden has been trying to say, one, that he was never connected to any of this, and two, and that this is all just attacks on his son who has struggled with addiction. These are really concrete claims here about, is Hunter here having a discussion with the Chinese energy magnate with saying, my dad's right next to here, making these sort of Godfather style claims. That is, first of all, we now have some reason to really say here, we need to know more about Joe Biden's role. And two, that these are really substantive charges that this IRS agent has put his name on and gone on the record to make. So to Bill's point, I don't think that the evasion tactic is going to work here, even on the politics. And Bill made the point in his column this week that Hunter may have to answer some questions himself and he may not say anything, but it's not a great look for him to have to go up there and basically refuse to engage on any of these substantive allegations.
Yeah, I agree. There's going to be a lot more to come here. Let's just turn and delve into what we learned about Hunter's taxes because, he made this deal and it was fascinating. All the media said, oh, it was such a reasonable deal before anybody even knew what he'd been accused of. Now we actually know. I mentioned in the first half of the show that 80-page document that the IRS put together recommending charges. Overall, it recommended felony charges for tax evasion and false tax returns for the years 2014, 2018, and 2019. Bill, to me, the 2014 one is really interesting, in part because that's at the center of these IRS agents' allegations that DOJ dragged its feet and that this was where the biggest kind of crimes, as it were included, and yet it hit a statute of limitations and Hunter was never held responsible. This had to do with his Burisma income, the money he got for sitting on this Ukrainian energy firm. What did we learn from the whistleblowers about what he'd done with his taxes in terms of that?
Well, we learned he reported some of his income as loans. We also know from before that he had all these shell companies, and we still don't know the end of that trail. In some ways, I think the gun and tax investigations were a sideshow because the tax investigations may have focused on reporting income and expenses that Hunter took, but they didn't focus on what he did in exchange for that money. So they're kind of a sideshow. But as Gary Shapley pointed out, by dragging their heels, justice kind of relieved Hunter from the really serious charges about 2014 and what he did with that money.
Yeah, so the allegations here were that he had the income he earned from Burisma sent to a separate firm run by a buddy of his, Devin Archer. And then he claimed, then he would get that money and then he would claim it was a loan, even though the second whistleblower pointed out, quote, "You can't loan yourself your own money," end quote, which I kind of liked. They also, said that Hunter was advised by a guy who'd been brought in to help him clean up his taxes that this was income and he needed to amend his returns, and he never did it. Kate, the 2018 return is also kind of fascinating because I think it kind of gets to the outrageousness of Hunter Biden and how he was sort of unleashed at the time. They claim that the big problem with that return was that he was basically falsifying, quote, business deductions, claiming a lot of things were business deductions when they obviously weren't. They believe that he underreported his income from anywhere to $267,000 to $500,000 less than what he should have. There are some kind of fun examples of that. Maybe you can give us a couple of some of what Hunter considered business deductions.
Yeah, Kim. So all Americans pay taxes. For instance, Kim, would you deduct $30,000 for Columbia University tuition and think that that was a business expense?
I wish.
That is one of the more family-friendly deductions. He also appears to have deducted money that went to a West Coast assistant that may have actually instead been a prostitute. There are hotel rooms for girlfriends, drug dealers, and potentially, I guess, even 2 nights for a hotel room for his dad, Joe Biden. This is the behavior of someone who is really behaving with impunity. I think I saw something, Venmo transactions, just the kind of not an honest misunderstanding by any stretch, really flagrant behavior here. And to your point, was, warned earlier in his returns by someone else, like, hey, you're misreporting this income. And that entity he was calling that money a loan. Well, they were treating it as an expense. So he didn't even make sure that lined up there. This is just first order, not even mistakes, just violations. And the IRS whistleblower said some of this you learn in the most basic training of schemes to look for when people are evading taxes. So I agree with Bill that this doesn't really cut to the heart of the matter of the Biden case, but I do think Americans can understand by paying their own taxes that this is not just somebody who was playing a little loose and made a mistake, but somebody who was making some pretty serious errors on his returns.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something really important and what strikes most people as off or wrong here. Without even knowing all the details, and Bill will give you the last word, but it just strikes me that when you look at this and everyone else thinks, well, if I did this on my tax returns, what would happen? But it kind of gets, doesn't it, to this Republican line that you're hearing more and more, that there does at times seem to be 2 standards of justice at the Department of Justice.
Yeah, there are 2 standards. And I would say one thing that comes across, just one, is Joe Biden has always said repeatedly that he knew nothing about his son's business deals, even though he traveled around with him, had meetings with some of Hunter's business associates while vice president. Now he's referenced in messages and so forth. And yet he didn't know, even though he's point man for the administration on a lot of these issues like Ukraine. So I think that's harder and harder to sustain, even if the press doesn't ask him about it. I think the second point is, I know Republicans would like to get answers tomorrow, and there's some talk of impeachment. I think it's going to take a while. They have to get all these people on the record to find out what's going on. It's going to be a few months, but I don't think that works for Joe because he's running for re-election. So if you have all these questions coming out and very specific, can the White House just say the president loves his son and I refuse to answer these kind of questions from the podium? I don't think they can.
Yeah, I would also just love to see even one reporter ask Joe Biden if he thinks his wealthy son paid his fair share of taxes. Okay, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kate. We also thank our listeners, and we want to remind you all that we are here every weekday. We will be back tomorrow, and you can email us with your thoughts, criticisms, praise at pwpodcast@wsj.com. And if you like the show, please hit the subscribe button.